I did not flinch. I did not look away. I just sat there in the back seat of the car, still in my bridesmaid dress, holding my phone with both hands, reading the message a second time. Then a third. The city lights outside the window blurred past, and I remember thinking, he actually thinks this ends here. It didn't. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning because this story only makes sense if you understand what I built and what they thought they could take from me. I had worked at Harman & Lyle Financial Consulting for 6 years. 6 years of arriving before anyone else, staying later than anyone asked, learning every system, mentoring the new analysts, covering for my manager when his mother was sick, filing the quarterly reports alone when half the team quit during the restructuring. 6 years of being the kind of employee that keeps a company running quietly and visibly, the way a foundation keeps a building standing. Nobody admires it, but everything collapses without it. My name is not important to this story. What's important is what I did and what I survived. My direct supervisor was a man I'll call my manager. He was competent, fair, and genuinely good at his job. We had a working relationship built on mutual respect. He knew what I contributed. He told me so, privately, more than once. The problem was never my manager. The problem was the owner's son. The owner of Harman & Lyle was a man who had built the firm from a 2-person operation in the late 90s into a mid-sized consultancy with 73 employees and 3 regional offices. He was demanding and occasionally cold, but he was principled. He had a code. You did good work. You were rewarded. You cut corners. You were gone. His son was 29 years old and had never worked anywhere else. He joined the company 3 years ago with a title that was created specifically for him, Director of Strategic Development, and a corner office he hadn't earned. He wore expensive watches and spoke in buzzwords and called meetings that accomplished nothing except reminding everyone he had the power to call meetings. I learned quickly to smile when he walked past my desk and say nothing unless spoken to directly. He had a habit of taking credit, not loudly, not obviously, that would have been too easy to call out. He would sit in a briefing, say nothing, and then send an email afterward to the owner summarizing his team's findings. His team. As if he'd been in the room, contributing, instead of scrolling his phone under the table. I documented everything, quietly, not because I was planning anything, just because something in me, some instinct that had been honed through years of being underestimated, told me to keep records. That habit saved me. The week everything came apart was the week before my best friend's wedding. I was her maid of honor. I had spent 4 months planning the bachelorette weekend, coordinating with the florist, helping her address 300 invitations by hand, tasting cakes at 6 different bakeries on a Saturday morning in November, when it was so cold our breath fogged in the parking lot. I was happy to do it. She had been my closest friend since college. When my father passed away 3 years ago, she was the first person at my door. She was the kind of friend you build your life around. The wedding was on a Saturday. I had taken Friday off. Thursday afternoon at 4:47 p.m. I received an email. The subject line read, "Position elimination, effective immediately." I sat with it for a long moment, long enough for my coworker in the next cubicle to ask if I wanted coffee. I said no thank you. I read the email again. It was signed by the owner's son. Not my manager, not HR, not even a joint communication, just him, alone, using a title he'd given himself, telling me that my position had been strategically consolidated and that my access to company systems would be terminated by end of business that day, and that I should return my laptop and badge to reception by 9 a.m. the following morning. There was no severance offer in the email. There was no prior warning. There was no mention of my 6 years. I closed my laptop. I picked up my coffee mug, the one my mother had given me that said "Bloom, where you are planted," and I carried it to my car in the parking garage. I sat in the driver's seat. I breathed. Then I drove home and tried on the dress I was wearing to the rehearsal dinner the next evening. It fit beautifully. I remember that detail because it seemed important at the time. That something in my life fit correctly. I found out later what had actually happened. One of the junior analysts, a young woman who had started 8 months ago and whom I had personally trained, told me the full story 2 weeks after the wedding. She was uncomfortable holding it. She needed to tell someone. The owner's son had been under pressure from his father to demonstrate results. The firm had missed projections 2 quarters in a row. Someone had to be responsible. Rather than acknowledge the strategic failures in his own division, the owner's son had compiled a report attributing the shortfalls to redundant overhead in the analytical support structure. He had presented this report to his father without showing it to my manager. My manager hadn't even known I was being let go until he got a separate notification at 5 p.m. He called me that evening. I missed the call. I was at the rehearsal dinner, laughing with the bridesmaids, pretending for my best friend's sake that nothing had happened. I had not told her. I refused to let someone else's cruelty shadow her happiness. I called my manager back from the parking lot of the restaurant, standing in heels on cold pavement, keeping my voice very even. He was furious in the quiet way that people are when they're too professional to be loud. He told me he had already escalated to HR. He told me he believed I had a case for wrongful termination and that the documentation around my dismissal was, in his words, a mess. He told me he was sorry. He told me to document everything I remembered, immediately, before details blurred. I thanked him. I went back inside. I danced at the rehearsal dinner. I gave a toast that made the bride cry. Then I went home and wrote 11 pages of notes. The wedding was beautiful. I stood at the altar beside my best friend and watched her marry a man who looked at her like she contained everything worth looking at. I held her bouquet during the vows. I did not think about the owner's son once, not until the reception. We were 40 minutes into dinner when I felt my phone buzz in my clutch. I almost didn't check it. But something made me, some quiet reflex, and when I looked at the screen, I saw it was a message from an unknown number. I heard you're looking for work. I have something in mind. Interested? I didn't know the number. I stepped away from the table, into the corridor near the coat check. I replied, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who's been watching your work for 2 years and thinks Harmon and Lyle just made a significant mistake." I stood in that corridor for a moment with the noise of the reception behind me. Clinking glasses, a jazz quartet, someone laughing at full volume. And I felt something shift. Not dramatically. Not like a scene in a movie. Just quietly, the way a tide turns. I went back to the table. I ate dessert. I danced with the bride. The unknown number, I learned the following Monday, belonged to the managing director of a firm called Caldwell & Associates. It was a boutique consultancy, smaller than Harmon and Lyle in headcount, but widely regarded as the more prestigious of the two. They worked with clients that Harmon and Lyle aspired to. They had won 3 national awards in the past 5 years. The managing director had worked with me briefly, indirectly, on a cross-firm project 18 months ago. He had noticed my work then and kept my name. When he heard through professional channels that I had been let go, news travels fast in consultancy, he had found my number through a mutual contact. He offered me a senior analyst position at a 15% salary increase, full benefits, and what he described as significant upward trajectory. I asked for a week to consider it. I spent that week talking to an employment attorney. What I learned was this: my termination had procedural problems, significant ones. No documented performance review, no formal HR process, no notice period as outlined in my employment contract. The owner's son had moved unilaterally and had done it badly. My attorney told me I had grounds for a claim and that the documentation I had kept over the years, the emails, the meeting notes, the project records showing my actual contributions versus what had been attributed to others, was, in her words, unusually thorough. She did not know I had been keeping it for this exact kind of moment. She thought I was just organized. I let her think that. Here is the part I don't tell people lightly. My mother did not support me. My mother had worked for the same accounting firm for 31 years. She believed, with a conviction I used to admire, that loyalty to an employer was a form of personal integrity. When I called her the night of the termination, not crying, just telling her what had happened, she said something that sat in my chest like a stone for weeks afterward. She said, "Sometimes when we're let go, it means they saw something we couldn't." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "I'll talk to you soon, Mom." And I hung up. I did not call her back for 11 days. When I did, I was measured. I was not cruel, but I told her clearly that I needed her to believe me, And that silence, or hedging in a moment like this, was not something I could absorb on top of everything else. I told her that I had 6 years of documentation that proved my value and that I was not asking for her analysis, I was asking for her presence. She was quiet. Then, she said, I didn't know the whole story. You didn't ask, I said. That conversation changed something between us. Not for the worse. For the better, eventually. But it took time. The legal process moved slowly. These things always do. My attorney filed a formal claim against Harmon and Lyle for wrongful termination, breach of contract, and failure to follow documented HR procedures. The owner's son, I was told, had reportedly laughed when he heard. He told someone in the office, this also traveled back to me, that I was making a mistake, and that his father would bury it. His father did not bury it. His father, the man who had built Harmon and Lyle over 30 years on a code of accountability, reviewed the claim with outside counsel. He reviewed my personnel file. He reviewed the procedural record of my termination. Then he called my attorney. Within 2 weeks, I had received a settlement offer. It was fair. My attorney told me I could push for more, but that a fair settlement quickly was sometimes better than a righteous fight slowly. I thought about it for 3 days. I accepted. Part of the agreement included a letter of reference, not a generic one, but a specific one, signed by the owner himself, confirming my years of service and contributions in clear, unambiguous language. My attorney had insisted on it. It was the detail that mattered most to me, not the money. The money was good, but the letter was what they could never take back. I started at Caldwell and Associates on a Tuesday in February. The office was different from what I was used to. Quieter, sharper, the kind of place where people closed their doors when they were working and opened them when they wanted to think out loud. There was no fluorescent lit open floor plan, no motivational banners, no mandatory team lunches. There was good coffee and high expectations, and a managing director who, on my first day, handed me a client file and said, "Tell me what you see." I told him what I saw. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, "That's more than the last person got in 3 months." I did not let it go to my head. I had learned too much by then to let flattery move me. But I worked hard, the way I always worked hard, and the work was noticed. The way this time it was actually supposed to be. I heard about what happened at Harmon and Lyle through my former manager, who stayed in occasional contact. The owner's son had not fared well, with no fall line to his father anymore. The settlement, the outside counsel review, the exposure of how the termination had been handled, his behavior had come under closer scrutiny. There had apparently been other incidents. Other employees who had documented things but never said anything. When the settlement brought outside eyes into the firm, those things surfaced. He resigned 6 months after I left. I did not celebrate. I want to be honest about that. There was no moment of triumph. No raised glass. I was in a meeting when I found out, and I finished the meeting, and then I sat with the news quietly for a few minutes, and what I felt mostly was tired. A good kind of tired. The kind you feel when something you've been bracing against finally stops pressing. I texted my former manager, heard the news. "Thank you for everything you did," he replied. "You did it. I just handed you the shovel." My best friend called me the week after I started the new job, just to check in. She was back from her honeymoon, jet-lagged and radiantly happy, and somewhere in the middle of us talking about her trip, she said, "You never told me what happened that week. Before the wedding. You seemed off at the rehearsal dinner." I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You held all of that together for me. You didn't let it touch my day." I told her the day was hers. That was just how it should have been. "You should have told me," she said. "Maybe," I said, "but you would have worried, and there was nothing to worry about yet. I had it." She laughed a little. "You always have it." I didn't always have it. There were nights that winter when I wasn't sure I had it. There was one night in particular, a Tuesday, around 2 in the morning, sitting on my bathroom floor in the dark because my apartment felt too quiet, when I thought about everything I'd poured into that company and wondered if it was worth it. If I was worth it, if the numbers I kept and the records I'd maintained and the care I'd put into every deliverable for 6 years had actually amounted to anything. I think about that night sometimes now. I think about it when I'm presenting to a client and I see them lean forward slightly because something I've said has landed exactly right. I think about it when the managing director copies me on emails to clients I've never met because he wants them to know my name. I think about it when I look at my salary and my title and the specific concrete proof that what I do matters. I had it. Even on the bathroom floor. I had it. 3 months after I started at Caldwell and Associates, I ran into the owner's son at an industry event. I did not plan for this. There was no part of me preparing for a confrontation. I was there for a panel discussion on regulatory trends, standing near the registration desk with a conference lanyard around my neck. When he walked in with someone I didn't recognize, he saw me. I could tell by the way his stride broke, just slightly, a half-second of recalibration. I looked at him directly. I did not look away first. I did not smile with apology or frown with aggression. I just held his gaze the way you hold something you've earned the right to hold. Then I turned back to my conversation. He did not approach me. He stayed on the other side of the room for the entire event. I gave him nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not acknowledgement, just the ordinary fact of my presence. Proof that I was still here, still working, still unbothered. And I think that was worse for him than anything I could have said. My mother and I had dinner last month. She brought a plant from my new apartment, a small pothos in a terracotta pot, and set it on my windowsill without being asked, the way mothers do things. We ate takeout at my kitchen table and she asked about my work, and I told her, and she listened the way she hadn't that first night. At some point she said, "I think I didn't want to believe it could happen to you." "What do you mean?" I asked. "That you could do everything right," she said, "and still be treated like that." I thought about that for a moment. "It does happen," I said. "But it doesn't have to be the ending." She nodded slowly. She looked at the plant on the windowsill. "You're going to need a bigger pot for that in about 6 months," she said. I laughed. It surprised me, the fullness of it. The ease. "Yeah," I said. "I'll be ready." I want to say something directly to whoever is watching this and recognizing themselves in it. There are people who will mistake your patience for weakness, your documentation for paranoia, your grace under pressure for resignation. They will think that because you didn't yell, you didn't notice. Because you didn't fight in the moment, you won't fight at all. Because you kept showing up and doing good work without demanding acknowledgement, you must not believe in your own worth. Let them think that. The records you keep matter. The records you keep matter. The reputation you build quietly matters. The people who actually see your work. There are always some. They remember. You are not invisible to the people who matter, only to the people who prefer it. When they finally move against you, they will do it sloppily. Because people who underestimate you also underestimate how much they need to be careful. That sloppiness is your opening. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to be cruel. You don't have to make a scene or send a message or announce anything to anyone. You just have to be thorough. You have to keep going. And you have to trust. Even on the floor at 2 a.m. Even when your own mother says the wrong thing. Even when you're standing in a parking lot in heels reading an email that tries to reduce 6 years of your life to a single word, eliminated. You have to trust that the story isn't over yet. It isn't. Mine wasn't. And I promise you neither is yours. I've thought a lot about what actually made the difference. Not the settlement. Not the new job. Not even the letter signed by the owner himself, though that letter meant more to me than I expected it to. What made the difference was something I did years before any of this happened, in ordinary moments nobody witnessed. Every time I sent an email, I kept a copy. Every time my work was presented under someone else's name, I noted the date and the original file. Every time I stayed late to fix something that wasn't my responsibility, I did it anyway, not for credit but because I believed the work itself was worth doing correctly. I didn't know I was building a case. I thought I was just being thorough. That's the thing about integrity that nobody tells you clearly enough. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel heroic in the moment. It feels like staying at your desk when you could have left. Like keeping a folder nobody asked you to keep. Like doing the right thing in a Tuesday afternoon meeting when there's no audience and no reward. It accumulates quietly, the way interest does, and you don't see the total until the day someone tries to take something from you, and you open that folder and realize you have everything you need. The owner's son made a mistake that people like him make constantly. He assumed that because I was quiet, I was unprepared. He assumed that my patience was passivity. He had watched me absorb small injustices for 3 years and concluded I would absorb this one too. He was wrong, but not because I suddenly became a different person. I was always the same person. He just never looked closely enough to see it. There's a version of this story where I make a scene, where I reply to that email with everything I know, copy every senior leader, let the anger out. I understand that impulse. I felt it. But I have learned, slowly, honestly, that the most durable form of power is the kind that doesn't need to be performed. The managing director at Caldwell and Associates had been watching my work for 18 months before he ever contacted me. He didn't need me to advocate for myself loudly. The work spoke. The reputation traveled quietly, on its own, through channels I wasn't even aware of. That's what I want to say to anyone sitting with a similar story right now. Your consistency is not invisible, even when it feels that way. The right people see it. They just don't always say so until the moment it matters. And about my mother, I don't tell that part of the story to cast her as a villain. I tell it because the hardest conversations I've ever had were not with the people who treated me badly. They were with the people I love, who I needed to be honest with, even when it was uncomfortable. She didn't ask for my full story that first night. I should have told her anyway. That's on both of us. We found our way back over takeout at my kitchen table and a pothos plant on the windowsill, and I think we understand each other better now than we did before all of this happened. That, too, is a form of result. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet, lasting kind. The actions we take, good or careless, honest or expedient, shape what comes back to us, not through any mysterious force, but through the simple, mechanical truth that people remember how we treated them. The owner's son's behavior did not stay contained. It never does. Every corner he cut, every person he dismissed, every credit he took, those things were remembered by someone. When outside eyes came in, they found a pattern, not an incident. That pattern was built one decision at a time over 3 years. So was mine. Build yours carefully. Build it even when no one is watching, especially then.